Hello, everyone. We are going to wait just a moment for more viewers to come on, and then we will begin the webinar in just a minute. All right, I think we have a good base now online. Good morning to those of you tuning in from Washington, D.C., and good evening to those of you tuning in from Asia. We have a very insightful conversation in store for you all today on ASEAN's role in the current Myanmar crisis. So since Operation 1027, dynamics in Myanmar have seen some of the most significant changes as the resistance continues to make headway on the ground. And as a result, most international powers are going to have to continue to adapt their approach to deal with the Myanmar crisis, including ASEAN. In fact, this event is taking place at a very timely manner as the ASEAN Foreign Ministers meeting is going on, as well as the East Asia Summit and the ASEAN Regional Forum are all taking place over the next few days in Laos, who is the current ASEAN chair. So I could not think of a better time with a better person to discuss the ASEAN-Myanmar relationship. And today we have brought on one of the top ASEAN experts, Moe Thuzar. Moe is a senior fellow and coordinator for the Myanmar Studies Programme at ISEAS Yusof Ishak Institute. And prior to this, she served for close to 10 years as the ASEAN Secretariat, also writing on Burma's foreign policy implementations from 1948 to 1988 for her PhD at the National University of Singapore. She possesses both a niche understanding and expertise on Myanmar and ASEAN, so she makes for the perfect speaker today. Undoubtedly, within the last year, Myanmar and ASEAN has provided us multiple angles to discuss, and I will turn it over to Moe to give her assessment of ASEAN's involvement in the crisis within the last year and future steps the blocs are looking at taking. As we begin our discussion, I encourage the audience to type in your questions in the Q&A to make for a insightful and productive conversation. Moe, let me turn it over to you.
Thank you, Sydney, for that kind introduction. Good morning, everyone. It's the evening here in Singapore from where I'm connecting. It's great to be able to join you, Sydney, and the Stimson Center for this conversation. And it's really interesting because it's happening just as the ASEAN foreign ministers' annual meetings have concluded in Laos, which holds the rotational chairmanship for this year. And I think the foreign ministers are still having their post-ministerial conference discussions with various counterparts from the ASEAN Dialogue partner countries. But the 57th ASEAN ministerial meeting, that annual meeting of the foreign ministers, was held on the 25th of July in Vientiane in Laos, and that was yesterday. I've been trying to get a hold of the joint communique, which is the statement that summarizes what was discussed and agreed upon by the foreign ministers at the end of each of these meetings. I'm sorry to report that I haven't managed to lay my hands on it because I don't see it being posted yet. Although different foreign ministries in the region have been posting summaries on their websites of what was discussed. For example, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs here in Singapore has given a quick summary that the ASEAN foreign ministers discussed ways to advance ASEAN's community building and regional integration. And I'm quoting from the website summary here. And among the areas that the foreign ministers discussed included emerging areas such as digital and green economies, strengthening ASEAN's collective response to regional global challenges in line with Laos's theme for its chairmanship this year, enhancing connectivity and resilience. But there are also items on the ASEAN ministerial meeting agenda, which is very relevant to the topic we're talking about today, which is about Myanmar. And that was on the Malaysian Foreign Ministry's update on their website, which listed the items on the agenda for discussion included follow up to the ASEAN leaders' review and decision on the implementation of the 5-point consensus, which is the document that ASEAN leaders came up with in 2021, negotiating it with Senior General Min Aung Hlaing to try and bring about a cessation of the violence that was already happening in Myanmar after the coup. And then again, we see tweets from ASEAN foreign ministers, such as Indonesia's foreign minister Retno Marsudi, where she's also, shared with the media that there is no progress on the implementation of that 5-point consensus. And of course, because Myanmar's representation, Myanmar's participation in important meetings such as ASEAN summits and the foreign ministers' meetings is linked to non-compliance with or not implementing the 5-point consensus. If there is no progress, then at least Foreign Minister Retno has emphasized that Myanmar's participation in such meetings must still be kept at a non-political level. And of course, what we do know is that the non-political representative criterion, the State Administration Council's Foreign Ministry has started respecting ASEAN's non-political representative criterion starting this year with the Foreign Ministers' retreat in February. And now we have read and heard that there were officials from Myanmar's Foreign Ministry in Naypyidaw representing the country at the meeting. So that's according to the non-political criterion. I think Foreign Minister Retno and Singapore's Foreign Minister Dr. Vivian Balakrishnan also had bilateral meetings, and Retno's tweet on X actually also emphasized that both countries shared the same view on the lack of commitment of the Myanmar military regime to implement the 5-point consensus. What's interesting, of course, is that there was also this meeting between the foreign ministers of Indonesia, Laos, and Malaysia in what the Indonesian foreign ministry has entitled an ASEAN Troika informal consultation meeting. Now, this was something that was initiated during Indonesia's chairmanship year last year, 2023. And the troika is a concept that harks back actually to the Cambodian crisis way back in the late 90s, in 1997. But in those days, of course, it was foreign ministers of 3 countries, not necessarily past, present, and future ASEAN chairs, but the foreign ministers of 3 countries at that time who were familiar with the situation in Cambodia, who had been involved in it, who had proximity to Cambodia, and of course involving the ASEAN chair. So that was how the Troika first came about in the late 90s, in 1997. And of course, the Troika mechanism now that has become a precedent for discussing the Myanmar issue currently proposed is using this past, present, future ASEAN chair format. So that's how it's going to be. So this year, that Troika meeting is the Malaysian, Indonesian, and Laotian foreign ministers. Going forward, we'll probably see how that will get updated as next year Malaysia takes up the chair. So again, just to quickly summarize this ASEAN Troika meeting, there is an emphasis, which is interesting. It's not an ASEAN Troika meeting. The formal name seems to be ASEAN Troika Informal Consultation Meeting. So that informality is emphasized there. We could go into that later on. But there were 5 points apparently that were discussed: the deteriorating situation in Myanmar, the number of displaced persons, which you and I know, I guess the audience knows as well, are mounting as the conflict continues to escalate and intensify. The need for inclusive dialogue with stakeholders. This is something that Indonesia also tried to initiate last year. Interestingly, also the role of other countries in working with ASEAN, and also strengthening the Troika to implement the 5-point consensus. So that's just my way of giving a very quick summary. That's how it is in the absence of a formal document that we haven't yet managed to lay eyes on. The head of the Office of Special Envoy in the Indonesian Foreign Ministry, the person that was actually representing Foreign Minister Retno the whole of last year in meeting with different Myanmar stakeholders, Ambassador Ngurah Swajaya, also gave some comments to the press, and he repeated ASEAN's resolve that the five-point consensus remains the main reference on solving the crisis in Myanmar. So I guess that's what we can expect to see also being reflected in the joint communique when we get to see it. And I think there have been questions also about the potential or the projected elections by the State Administration Council that are being kind of like, ramped up in the SAC rhetoric with regard to 2025. But apparently there was no discussion among the ASEAN foreign ministers about this projected event. And so that's what we have to go by as of this point while we wait for the official documents. I think in the time remaining that I have before we go more into the conversational question and answer and discussions, let me just give a very quick observation, a couple of points of quick observations. The first is really looking at the regional or the ASEAN response since the coup in 2021, and maybe how to, I guess, quote unquote, understand the five-point consensus and the subsequent ASEAN decisions and statements regarding the Myanmar conflict. And why I do this is because I think, for those of us looking in and, I guess all of us very much concerned about what's happening in Myanmar and how the people are really facing very difficult challenges daily. The frustration, of course, is, it's been 3 years and nothing seems to be happening or moving. I think this is the kind of a general sentiment that we get. And yet, we have this regional association of which Myanmar is a member, and there have been instances in the past of that regional association, the regional organization, managing to make some kind of, imprint or affect some kind of minimal change, impress it upon the military leaders of the past and so on. So I think with all that frame of mind, myself trying to understand it, I always try to look back at these very esoteric statement and languages and expressions. So yes, we have the five-point consensus, which I mentioned. The 9 ASEAN heads of state and government negotiated with Senior General Min Aung Hlaing back in April 2021. But I think the points that were discussed and negotiated, agreed upon then, of course, ASEAN could not have, I guess, foretold or even prepared for the kind of scale and intensity that we've seen, how violence has basically escalated and intensified with the atrocities committed by the Myanmar military, starting with, of course, live fire into crowds of protesters, unarmed civilian protesters, a few weeks after the coup. And then because of the State Administration Council's intransigence in meeting the five-point consensus recommendations, ASEAN quickly saw how the State Administration Council tried to conflate its own internal political roadmap, also 5 points, with the five-point consensus. And that actually led to the ASEAN foreign ministers making that decision in October 2021, that as long as there was no progress in complying with or implementing the five-point consensus, the political principals from the State Administration Council would not be welcome to attend the ASEAN summit. And that was during Brunei's chairmanship. Interestingly, it was during Cambodia's chairmanship year in February 2022 that non-political representative criterion was expanded to include not just the summit, but also the foreign ministers' meeting. And interestingly, it was also during Cambodia's chairmanship year that the ADMM Plus, the ASEAN Defense Ministers Meeting Plus, which the defense ministers of ASEAN also meet with their counterparts from the different dialogue partner countries. There was only also a non-political representative from Myanmar invited to that ADMM Plus in November 2022. November 2022 was also, the summit in Cambodia. That was when they issued the first review of the five-point consensus, and there were also mention of maybe we need more specific implementation timelines and indicators. But we didn't see that happening in Indonesia's chairmanship year. And so when the summit under Indonesia's chairmanship in September 2023 rolled around, there was a second review of the five-point consensus by the ASEAN leaders. And we did see some maybe, slightly stronger language. There was more specific language referring to the Myanmar military as bearing, responsibility in particular for the continuing spiral of violence. But there was also this summit decision in September 2023 on deferring Myanmar's chairmanship turn, which would come up in 2026. So the heads of state and government of the 9 ASEAN countries agreed that Philippines would assume that rotational turn instead, and that the alphabetical rotation will continue until a different decision is made, meaning it's very clear if Myanmar wants to take up its turn, it's ASEAN that's going to make the decision. It's not up to whoever is proposing from Myanmar that they want to take up the turn again. And that's very different from the appreciation that was showed in 2005 when the previous military regime actually also voluntarily gave up its rotational turn to chair. So that's just a kind of like putting everything into context that ASEAN actually has made quite a lot, several, I would say, unprecedented decisions with regards to Myanmar in the context of what has happened after the 2021 coup. And as an intergovernmental organization, which basically only probably has regional diplomacy as its main tool or instrument, I think that's about the extent that we're seeing. Okay, I know that time's running out, but in the few minutes that's left to me, maybe I'd just like to show very quickly some slides that summarize the findings of the annual State of Southeast Asia surveys. Starting from 2022, there was the Myanmar question included in the annual surveys. And it actually points to certain interesting findings. So I'll just quickly share screen before we move into more in-depth Q&A. So I hope everyone can see the screen. This is the question that was asked in 2000 for the survey 2022 iteration. People were asked, respondents were asked about, whether they approve or disapprove of ASEAN's response to the Myanmar crisis. And you can see regionally, the regional summary here really shows that it's almost like one-third, one-third, one-third split between approval, disapproval, and people just not wanting to express an opinion whatsoever. But I like to delve deeper into country level attitudes. And so what you can see, of course, clearly the Myanmar respondents, there was this overwhelming disapproval. The next highest disapproval was from Thailand and from Singapore. And you can see the percentages that I've highlighted there on the screen. And the strongest approval for ASEAN's response to the crisis was Brunei. Well, it had chaired ASEAN in 2021, and Indonesia, which was going to be taking up the chair in 2023. And of course, I think here we need to also recognize that even though in terms of disapproval, Myanmar, Thailand, Singapore respondents were the top 3, there was higher approval ratings for ASEAN's response in Singapore than the disapproval ratings. And I've provided the link for people who are interested to just go back and delve more into the country findings. This is just a very quick summary slide pulled up about the different attitudes that people have towards options to quote unquote move the issue forward. So since 2022, the option of engaging in independent dialogue with all key stakeholders in Myanmar in order to build trust was one of the options put out there, including a coordinated and united response with international partners, or whether there should be harder methods utilized to effectively curtail the SAC, and other options such as expulsion, and of course the do nothing option of non-interference. And these are the kind of the regional summaries. But I would encourage people to really look at which countries prefer which option the most at the national level. And what we did see was this appetite among most of the ASEAN member states, respondents from most of the ASEAN member states, I should say, because this is a policy elite survey, that there was this interest or appetite to engage in independent dialogue with all key stakeholders, and that was also the higher regional average there. In 2023, moving on quickly, again, the details can be found here at this link. We found that the tendency to remain neutral about the 5-point consensus started emerging, particularly from past and incoming ASEAN chairs. And we also saw more attitudes about why the 5PC cannot work or will not work. And respondents from Singapore held the view that is because of the SAC's intransigence. I think naturally the Myanmar respondents might have viewed the 5-point consensus as being fundamentally flawed, which was one of the reasons that we also put there in the question. With regard to moving the Myanmar issue forward, again, appetite to engage in independent dialogue with all key stakeholders ranked high, even higher than in 2022, but the appetite for a coordinated response with international partners seemed to have declined. Appetite or the interest to utilize harder methods to curtail the SAC, expulsion, and non-interference, you can see how the percentages changed between 2022 and 2023. Now, comparing 2023 to this year's findings, 2024, again, I think the views that that 5-point consensus will not work because of the State Administration Council junta's intransigence, those percentages remain high, but so too does the preference of not wanting to make a statement either way in saying I remain neutral. My colleagues in the ASEAN Studies Center prepared this diagram. And so I think moving the Myanmar issue forward, what we see is, again, talking to everyone is still seen as the most preferred option. That's the one in blue. I don't think reinstating the SAC's involvement in ASEAN meetings is even seen as an option widely, only a very small percentage. And so I would just encourage everyone to delve for more details. There's this page here that provides links to all the survey reports. So I think I shouldn't keep on talking because I'm conscious of the time, and there are, of course, other interesting points to address. But I think maybe moving into question and answer and a more conversational discussion at this point in time might help go through some of the other points or observations that I had. Again, apologies for going over time, and I'll yield back the time to you, Sydney.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Mo. There is definitely a lot to unpack with what ASEAN is doing in terms of Myanmar and how it's approaching. I think the survey results that you just presented are actually quite interesting in terms of one I found particularly interesting was the decrease in ASEAN not wanting to take maybe a harsher push on the SAC, which brings me to a question of whether we see a shift in some of the ASEAN member states about how to integrate Myanmar into ASEAN, because there has been, as you said, language where Thailand and Laos have talked about making Myanmar, the junta specifically, presentable and how they want to reintegrate them back into the ASEAN family. So I was curious, how does that kind of language speak to how ASEAN member states may have differing opinions on how to deal with the junta? And are we seeing a way that ASEAN kind of wants to move past this civil war time into more of how are they going to integrate the junta back into ASEAN?
Right. Wow. You really started off with the most interesting question, Sydney, in terms of, the differing attitudes or sentiments among the different ASEAN member states with regard to how best do we deal with or talk about Myanmar, which has always been kind of like the problem child, if you will. Um, it's it's interesting for me to also see this reluctance for harder measures, but maybe I should qualify that here by how shall I put it? The reluctance, of course, I think is also linked with the notion of suspension or expulsion, which is, of course, the ultimate measure. Now, the ASEAN Charter, which was adopted in 2007 and ratified by practically all the ASEAN member states by the end of 2008, um, I think so. So that ASEAN Charter doesn't have any provision for steps to be taken if a member state is seen as is known to be not complying with or breaking or violating the principles of the ASEAN Charter. So that's the interesting point. I mean, other regional organizations like the African Union, for example, maybe they have clear steps on suspending a member state for human rights violations, say, and you know those steps are laid out in their charter. So the ASEAN Charter doesn't have that. So much less, and this is suspension, so much less provisions for expulsion. And I think that's the reluctance that I think we see being kind of reflected in the kind of questions or the options that we give in the State of Southeast Asia survey. People, I think, equate harsher measures with that ultimate point about expulsion. And I think also within ASEAN, the understanding is, you know, it's easy to expel. But say when a member state wants to join again, it may not be that easy to go through that admission process because there will be certain criteria. I mean, look at even how Timor-Leste, which has been you know, applying for ASEAN membership, knocking on ASEAN's door. And right now, it is an observer status. It has observer status, and it is preparing. But even then, that date for Timor-Leste's joining, it's been pending. We thought that maybe during Indonesia's chairmanship year, might it happen? Seems not. So, I mean, this is just kind of like a very broad example that I'm bringing up. Because ASEAN doesn't have those specific steps, I think there is a reluctance of expulsion, then what? And of course, the concern also is if you expel a member state, does the problem go away? Or would we be serving the interests of regional stability or not? And of course, the concerns and needs of the people in that country without even that, the link with membership. So I think those were the kind of concerns that most ASEAN members would have. But your question was much more specific about countries, particularly on mainland Southeast Asia. And I think for the case of Thailand, particularly during the previous administration rather than the current administration, bringing up language of bringing Myanmar back to the table or bringing Myanmar back to the ASEAN family. And I think sometimes this is why I'm spending a bit more time talking about membership and expulsion. Myanmar, as a member state, as a country, still continues to be a member. The issue is with the State Administration Council's non-compliance. So I think there is no question of Myanmar not being in the ASEAN family. And if we talk about bringing Myanmar back to the table, it's only at the summit and the foreign ministers' meetings that the political principles from the State Administration Council are limited or restricted to actually just sending a non-political representative. They're not saying don't come, just send a non-political representative. At all other sectoral meetings, at all other levels, even including senior officials' meetings, preparing for the foreign ministers' meetings, Myanmar representatives are there from the State Administration Council's controlled bureaucracy in Naypyidaw, of course. So I think there is this kind of maybe I don't want to kind of put words into people's mouths, but I think this is the kind of the use of language that tends to maybe confuse people in the sense that, you know, it's kind of like an empty seat syndrome. It's not. I mean, there are these criteria, and it's clearly linked to the 5-point consensus, which I think countries like Indonesia, Singapore, and Malaysia, to a certain extent, are also trying to uphold. If there is no progress in implementing the priorities of the 5-point consensus, the first of which is cessation of violence. How can ASEAN, in all good conscience, act as if nothing happened and welcome representatives from the State Administration Council to the table. So the communication is there, I think, and through the various engagements with different stakeholders, especially instituted during Indonesia's time, is there. So that's, I think, how I would view that. And I think this is also why we do see these statements, formally, informally, from the foreign ministers of Indonesia, particularly, also Singapore, and also we've also heard from the Malaysian and maybe in Philippine foreign ministers in the past as well, on the importance of upholding that decision of the non-political representative criterion. Sorry, I tended to go a bit long, but that's the broad context.
No, I mean, that's definitely super interesting. And I think it's something that when people from the outside are looking at ASEAN, they see these two groups, right? They see ASEAN as a bloc as a whole, but then you also see individual countries still dealing with Myanmar on a bilateral basis and also trying to take larger roles within the ASEAN space for how to address what's going on in Myanmar. And so you see a little bit of push and pull between members and not necessarily always the same narrative, which I think brings people to think there may be less unity and leads to frustration. But like you also mentioned, SAC cooperation is also needed, right, for the ability to put forth the 5-point consensus and see progress. It's a takes two to tango, basically, in how ASEAN is approaching this situation. But I think that leads us good into some of the questions we are receiving online about individual countries. So we have a question from the audience asking, what more do you think Singapore and other individual countries in ASEAN could do to ameliorate the situation in Myanmar?
Right. I think that was from Christina. Hello, Christina.
Mm-hmm.
Good to see the question. As I mentioned, I think earlier on, there are certain countries in ASEAN that are holding the line, as I like to call it. And so that is, I think, if ASEAN standing on principle, upholding the decisions, upholding the principles of the ASEAN Charter that do call and provide for respecting democracy, good governance, and human rights, and of course the will of the people. It's been those countries that have consistently been upholding those principles and the decision since 2021. So I think that's something that at the policy level, at the regional table, the regional diplomacy level, that's what countries like Singapore have been doing. Singapore has also always emphasized the importance of humanitarian assistance and the importance of humanitarian assistance reaching the communities in need in Myanmar. But here, of course, is also where efforts of ASEAN to deliver humanitarian assistance to Myanmar has also been hampered by the intergovernmental structure of ASEAN. It's an intergovernmental organization, and therefore the way that such processes are facilitated has to be coordinated through the receiving country. And whether we like it or not, I mean, the reality that ASEAN faces is that the State Administration Council is, of course, insisting that the reception and the distribution will be coordinated by a local partner that they identify or are comfortable with. In this case, is the Myanmar Red Cross. But I think there have been different ways of, creative, innovative ways of cross-border humanitarian assistance delivering that can be explored, that have been explored, but that may be due to sensitivities or the need for respecting, I think, the safety and security concerns of those involved don't really make it that much to the headlines. So I think that's the challenge, of course. Interestingly, it was ASEAN that coordinated or facilitated the breakthrough in 2008 after Cyclone Nargis. And it was also because of Cyclone Nargis that the foreign ministers actually finally all agreed and ratified the ASEAN Agreement for Disaster Management and Emergency Response that actually created the ASEAN Humanitarian Assistance Center. But I think ASEAN is also realizing that there are other ways to reach and ways of working with different partners to do so. But if we go through the ASEAN process, I think that's what we're confronted with. Of course, all the ASEAN member states in which there are Myanmar nationals and citizens living, working, pursuing education, and so on. I think that's another way that we could also look at how the different governments in the other ASEAN member states also try to consider the different kind of humanitarian and other needs that these communities will have. It's not just Singapore, of course. The country that bears the most brunt of such quote unquote spillovers would be a country like Thailand.
Yeah, definitely. We're going to move on to another question too about another ASEAN member state, which is Indonesia. And I'm going to tie this into questions about change in leadership as well. Now that Prabowo is becoming the president of Indonesia, how can it affect the attentiveness of Indonesia in ASEAN's response? And another question is that how do you think ASEAN's capabilities and capacities meet the expectations of the international community? I think that's a really interesting question, as well as the fact that we have seen several leadership changes within ASEAN, and I would love for you to touch on how that's also impacting potentially how ASEAN's looking at Myanmar.
Right. Well, I think, policy continuity is something that, of course, we need to consider. And most administrations, and, leadership changes, administration changes that we see, we look at whether there will be policy continuity with regard to an important topic. And of course, every country sets that their policy, charts their policy based on the interests and the priorities of that country or what they think is important for the people. So when it comes to a topic like, say, position on Myanmar, policy on Myanmar, it will be made. It will be made with the consideration of what's in that country's best interests and so on. I think in the question, specific mention was made about Indonesia. Now, we know that there will be a new administration taking office later this year in October. And so we have to see how much of that policy continuity from the present administration will be carried over. And of course, that policy continuity, that leadership and administration change will also affect who will sit at the helm of Indonesia's foreign ministry in the new administration. So I think these are the kind of the factors, the points that we're looking at. But of course, Indonesia is one of the countries in ASEAN that has also, since 2021, been very consistently upholding and holding up the principles of which up to now, Foreign Minister Retno has been emphasizing time and again about the importance of complying with important ASEAN decisions. And this links back to what's called ASEAN centrality. What is agreed to regionally, regional commitments require national implementation obligation. And that is the obligation of every ASEAN member state. So I think that's how I think we need to look at it, of course. And it really is then, maybe short answer would be the salience of addressing the Myanmar question with regard to what the administration that takes office views as its national interest and policy priorities.
Yeah, that's interesting. So if I'm understanding correctly, despite leadership changes, those who are within the ASEAN blocs have made commitment to uphold certain behaviors as a bloc, kind of showing the unity on the issue on Myanmar. So like you said, with the 5-point consensus, right, that's been agreed upon, and they'll have to uphold that despite leadership changes, if I'm understanding correctly.
Well, yes, because this non-political criterion, and of course we do hear that, some countries feel more strongly about it than others, or some countries or some member states are maybe less comfortable about it than others. But the reality is that still the 9 ASEAN member states still uphold it. Mm. They still are sticking to a non-political representative as long as the State Administration Council in Myanmar remains intransigent to meeting some of the important priorities of the 5-point consensus. So it's linked to compliance. It's linked to that national commitment, regional commitment, national implementation obligation, but it's also upholding what ASEAN member states subscribe to. So this is what I see. Countries may have differing attitudes, but at the regional level, they're still collectively upholding it. And so it really, I guess, it boils down to who wants to be viewed as rewarding non-compliance when a regional decision
Right.
has been made?
Yeah, absolutely. Great. So also speaking on how we've been assessing individual countries, I'm going to move on to how more things are assessed within ASEAN. We have a question from the audience about how do ASEAN members assess the performance and progress of its special envoy for Myanmar? Going forward, what role do you see the special envoy in addressing the ongoing crisis in Myanmar? Which I think is a very interesting question because from when you look at Cambodia, Indonesia, Laos, and then we'll have Malaysia next year. Special envoys play very different roles in terms of how often they're willing to engage with the Myanmar junta, especially Min Aung Hlaing. So I'd love to hear how do ASEAN members assess the special envoy in Myanmar, and maybe have we seen frustrations from varying envoys, especially since the coup in 2021?
I think again, that's another very interesting question because usually what we see is a special envoy appointed, or like say for example the UN special envoy, the UN Secretary General special envoy on Myanmar. The person is appointed for a certain amount of a duration, and then they have to try to fulfill their mandate, which is what we've seen with the different UN special envoys on Myanmar. The UN Secretary General's special envoy on Myanmar. Uh, for ASEAN's case, we have seen that the special envoy's term is tied to the ASEAN chair. So it's not the ASEAN special envoy, but the special envoy of the ASEAN chair. So that actually kind of links it also to what the ASEAN chair, the country holding the rotational chair of ASEAN, what input does that have, and what how that rotational ASEAN chair can also own the process, which is all very well and good. But in reality, what we've seen, of course, is that it takes time for the special envoys of each ASEAN chair when the chairmanship rotates to kind of gear up, prepare, get to know the stakeholders, the interlocutors in Myanmar, and then try to get things done. And then, before we know it, then the rotational turn comes up again, and then a new ASEAN chair takes place. So I think there is some frustration of having the special envoy in ASEAN tied to or linked with the rotational chairmanship term, which is every year. So I think there is merit, and I think ASEAN, if I recall correctly, 3 years ago, ASEAN did discuss the different ways, but there were differing views of how to go about it. So this, I think, this compromise decision was also ASEAN's way of making sure that the ASEAN chair remains committed to an important internal question and challenge, such as what the Myanmar conflict has proved to be. So right now, uh, you know, those of us in the research track two community were looking at hoping for more specific indicators on the implementation of the 5-point consensus, and of course the tasks and the mandate of the special envoy. As of now, I don't see that there are such specific report cards, but I do know that the special envoy each year has to present his report to the foreign ministers, who then assess and make recommendations. And then again, the foreign ministers' recommendations and inputs, of course, the final kind of assessment, review, recommendation, and decision is made by the leaders. And so I would look at all of that in a kind of a composite whole, rather than one person, and what that one person can or cannot do, given the very real constraints and restrictions and limitations that they face. Because let's not forget, in 2021, when Brunei was ASEAN chair and first appointed its second foreign minister as the chair's envoy, the State Administration Council took quite some time to grant an entry approval for the Brunei ASEAN special envoy to visit Myanmar and all of that. And we have we do know of past instances in the past when ASEAN did appoint a special envoy. The previous military regime also dragged its feet on granting an entry visa. And even if that special envoy managed to get to Yangon, to Myanmar, requests to meet with Dawn San Suu Kyi, who was under house arrest at the time, those requests were also denied. So we have to see this also in the kind of the very limited scope within which the special envoys have to operate.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a really good distinction to make, and something that I noticed when I was doing my own research, looking at the different roles that chairmans played in since the coup in 2021. You could definitely see the direct connection between whatever attitude the chairman have was definitely connected to how the special envoy dealt with Myanmar as well. So under Cambodia, we saw more interactions, right, with the Myanmar junta than maybe we would have seen with Indonesia. So also moving on to the next question as well, looking at Laos's state as chair and this new troika mechanism that you discussed earlier. I want to bring the conversation back to that and discuss how you've seen the troika over since it was implemented under Indonesia, and what kind of effectiveness has come with it, if any, and do you see it as being effective in terms of having more voices and maybe taking some of the pressure off of the current chair with dealing with such a large issue like Myanmar?
Right. Okay. That's a lot of points to address the troika, and of course the present chair and what the future chairs will need to consider. The troika itself is a mechanism for more than one ASEAN member state to collaborate and consult on that issue. So maybe if we link that back to the previous question about how do we assess, the effectiveness of the performance of the special envoy, I think that's also one of the ways of doing that accountability or balance or reporting or monitoring, what you will, by having the foreign ministers of these three countries, past, present, and incoming chairs, also sit down and talk about it. Because past chair would have had its own experience in tackling certain challenges and issues, which they could then have, hand over, share the experience to the current chair. And that all it gives the incoming chair coming in to the chairmanship in the following year a bit more perspective on what the problems are and how they have been addressed or not addressed, and what then its incoming chairmanship could do. So it also changes. But I think there's also some thinking, if I'm not mistaken, that limiting it to past, present, and incoming chairs probably also doesn't consider one important factor, which is the proximity of Thailand, which has, among ASEAN members, of course, Thailand shares a border with Myanmar, the longest border. I mean, Laos also shares a border, but it's a very short border, and it's most of it is the river. So Thailand shares a very long border with Myanmar, and it's also probably the only country in ASEAN, in Southeast Asia, that has the longest institutional memory on dealing with Myanmar, even before Myanmar became an ASEAN member. And of course, starting from the aftermath of the 1988 coup in Myanmar, Thailand has also had the most experience of, I think, having had to deal with the kind of uh, the spillover of the Myanmar people fleeing conflict, and I think here I'd like to give a shout out to Mary Callahan. Hi, Mary. We've had conversations on this before in different settings, and it's great that I think I see Mary bringing up that point, feeling the pain as a result of the suffering of the Myanmar people. And I think that's where I think the Troika Plus concept is being discussed, of making better use of not just the institutional memory, but also I think trying to coordinate better, maybe among smaller groups of countries, or between smaller groups of countries, on having those kinds of maybe more coordinated efforts with regard to addressing very specific issues or questions or challenges that people are facing particularly with regard to issues and challenges that know no borders, health concerns, for example. And also, I think the breakdown of the education and the health systems in Myanmar since the coup and what has happened with uprising to the coup. So I think that's how I think I would look at it and contextualize it in terms of ASEAN's ongoing, I guess, different mechanisms, if you will, including the troika, and why they're keeping it informal, maybe because they want to think about a troika plus, and of course this I think growing recognition of having this kind of more I think coordinated efforts, concerted approaches, and coordinating across border among or with smaller groups within ASEAN and perhaps even like-minded external partners, external actors. I would see it as a concentric circle, if you will.
Yeah, I think that's a really, really good point about the troika. It's been an interesting mechanism to observe since it was put in by Indonesia. So we're getting to 10 minutes, so I want to make sure we wrap up with one or two more potentially hard-hitting questions for you. We have a question from John Brandon who says it's nice to see you as well. John, so glad
Hi,
you could
John.
join us. He asks, and this goes back to the issue of expulsion from ASEAN. While Myanmar does not want to be expelled from ASEAN, would it alter the SAC's calculus on retaining power if it was expelled? And wouldn't the SAC be content to have stable relations with Thailand, China, and India, and where it can have investment from countries like Vietnam and Singapore, as long as its power is not compromised? So that's John's question. So I would love to hear your thoughts on that.
Well, John, you're looking at someone who seriously believed that exposure and education through ASEAN would somehow bring about some constructive a change in thinking in the minds of very hardline generals. Some are more hardline than others, of course. And so I think this is also the difference in thinking of technocrats and the very hardline generals in terms of the importance of being part of a regional mainstream and so on. I know from 1997 when Myanmar became an ASEAN member, in the face of many, I think, comments and well, many comment and concern, um, the very hard line among the generals actually were upset that now being a member of ASEAN, it's opened us up to even more criticism and scoldings, quote unquote. And this is what, me kind of like sharing a bit of oral history of that experience then. And so their thinking, of course, is very much viewing ASEAN as a convenient shield, which ASEAN is not. ASEAN viewed having Myanmar as a member as a way of being able to have that two-way communication to impress upon the generals on the importance of, changing for the better. But I think the past 25 plus years of Myanmar's membership in ASEAN has also showed the extent of that message being received or not by very recalcitrant hardline generals, such as we have seen again since 2021. So, John, to address your really interesting question, and I will try to address it. I have this ongoing project, this research paper that I'm doing on the lessons, experience, and challenges of ASEAN and Myanmar. I think it's for me, I would look at it as in it's not being in anyone's interest for Myanmar to be expelled from ASEAN. Short term, of course, if you think about it, then the thing is, oh, one headache less. But as I was observing earlier on to Sydney and the audience, of course, at the beginning of this talk, when Myanmar is no longer a member, it will be much more difficult, I think, for any form of even diplomatic intervention. And it also opens up, I think, certain uncertain, I would say, geopolitical uncertainties. I know I'm kind of like my vocabulary and dictionary is fading, but I think you know what I mean. there are geopolitical uncertainties of, I think, not having Myanmar within ASEAN, and also, I think, at least being able to impress that ASEAN centrality importance, which, as you know, ASEAN really tries to maintain that balance between major power rivalry and competition. And I guess the ASEAN platform is probably one of the few platforms where ASEAN collectively can still try to assert that centrality despite obvious bilateral tendencies and interests. So I think that's how I would approach that very difficult question. Ultimately, in the long run, and most certainly, I think for the future of a lot of people who are now seeking more opportunities than ever, just to eke out a living and seek education and employment opportunities in peace, it would affect a lot of people's futures.
Great, Mo. Thank you. That's definitely not an easy question to answer, and you did it seamlessly.
Well, John likes to keep me thinking, so thanks for that, John.
Yeah, John's great. I think we have 5 minutes left, but I want to hit you with one more question I think we've got time for. So elections, 2025. The junta
Mhm.
announced they plan to have elections next year, and it's too early to say, I think, necessarily what ASEAN would do, but I would like to hear if you've heard anything about how ASEAN is perceiving the elections. Realistically, they wouldn't be free and fair, just given the junta and kind of the ongoing crisis in Myanmar would make it very difficult to set up polling, I believe. But just curious on how ASEAN's feeling about potential elections and also the recognition, if they were to happen in some form, would ASEAN recognize? What would the response be in terms of those elections?
I think, you know, at least from what I know, talking to tractate counterparts and so on, this has been a question that ASEAN has been mulling for the past few years since the coup. Because, of course, in the State Administration Council's political roadmap, there always have been this mention of convening elections and then transferring power back to the elected political party. Um, I think ASEAN's concern, of course, first and foremost, would be the elections, whether they're free, fair, and whether all the major political stakeholders in Myanmar have a chance to uh, stand in those elections. And when the coup happened in 2021 February, ASEAN's main concern also was upholding the 2020 election results. So I think this is something that, of course, I think ASEAN officials, ASEAN governments in the 9 member states in ASEAN will have to start, I think, thinking about and assessing different scenarios. If the elections are not free and fair, and we've seen examples of that, well, not examples, I would say, we have seen a past parallel in 2010, although that's not directly comparable because post 88, there was not this question that arose as it did post 2021 coup about the authority that represents Myanmar. Post 88, that question did not arise in the way that it has after February 2021. So I think that's one big consideration that the that ASEAN member states will now have to confront as to how will ASEAN view and treat elections in 2025 if and when they happen. And of course, the concern that ASEAN has, of course, again, if it is for the security and safety of people in Myanmar, what kind of security, or safety environment are these elections going to be held such that the safety of people in the polling areas, in the voting areas, or people who are interested to stand for election. I think these are the considerations that we all need to think about in even considering what we are hearing more this year from Naypyidaw about these projected elections in 2025? So it's a difficult question and something that I think, I don't know about the rest, but it's one of several questions that does try sometimes, keeps me awake at night because it really pertains to acceptance or not. And if ASEAN holds to the five-point consensus, of which one of the priorities, a very important priority, is cessation of violence. If that doesn't happen, then non-compliance with that also has to be something that needs to be tackled. And of course, too much has happened since 2021 for even say if one action, one step is taken for everything to be dismantled. I think this is probably a moment where, forgive me for borrowing something from from way back in 2011, we really need to think about how how do you match action with action if there are actions and what kind of actions can those be? And this goes back to, I think, what the Track 2 community has been talking about, the importance of having specific indicators and timelines. So again, this is a difficult question that is that everyone will have to grapple with, not just ASEAN. Of course, in this region, it's ASEAN, but it's also the international community in terms of how these projected elections will or will not affect the countries and the people's future.
Absolutely. Thank you, Mo. I really appreciate it. I guess we'll just have to watch and see. And the domestic response within Myanmar for elections are just as important, and as well as seeing how the international community is going to respond and what that could mean for empowerment of the junta currently. So we are right at the top of the hour. This has been a really great conversation. I thank you so much for taking the time to come and talk to us about such a complex issue for like ASEAN and Myanmar relations. For those of you watching, it's a busy month for our Myanmar project. We actually have two more upcoming events, one on August 1st with our East Asia co-director Yoon Swin and Michael Morgan from CSIS on how China and the US are assessing the civil war in Myanmar. And we will also have another event on August 12th with two Burmese experts looking at the role of local administrative authorities in Myanmar and how they impact the ongoing civil war. So we encourage you all to please RSVP and tune in. Thank you again, Mo. This has been a great conversation. Hope everyone has a good rest of their day.
Thank you very much. And to everyone who asked those questions, thank you for constantly challenging me to think more and try to come up with, I think, more thoughtful analyses that will ultimately, I hope, make a difference for the people of Myanmar who have done nothing to deserve what they're going through.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Mo. Thank you, everyone. Goodbye.
Thank you.